Okay.
Hi, Ann. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
See, I surprised you. I didn't give you the
The
usual
countdown.
countdown. Yeah, we usually do a little countdown before I do that, but I gave you no warning this time. And look, I can't get rid of that. I'm trying. See, I need John Alton to come in here and figure out how to light this. So there, like that. Now you don't see that there's a, yeah.
There we go. There we go. Now we'll pull out our copy of Painting
But
with
I'm not going to
Light.
see it. Yeah. So anyway, we're just going to live with the fact that I have this recessed tooth right there. Okay.
Okay.
Um, and I'm scruffy today too, because
Yeah.
it's I'm just not going in front of a camera except this one. So
Yeah.
I'm not even shaving because this is the real me.
The authentic Eddie.
Exactly. And your hair looks fabulous as always.
Thank you very much. I just got it cut this week, so I'm pretty happy with it.
I was reading an article today on the internet about I don't want to get into the politics of this, but it was about the politics of short hair on women.
Yeah.
And it was this whole thing like alleging that the Republican Party will only accept women with long hair. Like short hair is no good,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just like it's come to this. Like there isn't enough stuff that they have to bitch about. Now it's like short hair on women is also a bad thing,
Well,
which I happen to love. I love, love, love short hair on women.
yeah, when I was younger, I always remember this. My dad saying that a woman of a certain age should have short hair. But you
Well,
know,
that's it. Yeah, I mean that's kind of a good point because Kathleen had long hair and she futzed with it her whole the entire time we've been together. It was like an hour of every day was spent on the hair.
yeah,
And then COVID happened, and then finally I was able to. She let me cut her hair, and it just looks fantastic. I'm jealous of Kathleen's hair, and she doesn't color it anymore. It's completely gray,
yeah,
and it's just the most beautiful, lustrous gray, kind of variegated. When she
yeah,
cuts it in a little shelf in the back, it's like it's two-tone naturally, and it's fabulous. The stylists and everybody go nuts when she comes in and says your hair is just fantastic. Anyway, so
yeah.
yeah, she's very happy that she doesn't have to go through all that rigmarole
Yeah,
anymore.
because I kind of grew mine out during the pandemic and I kept it long for a while. And then I got so tired of dealing with it all the time that I cut off because I've had my hair really long, like at least three times. And every time and then wound up just cutting it really short again because it's just easier to deal with too.
Yeah, and
You know,
and Kathleen also advised me of the time, when it came time for me to start cutting my hair shorter because I'm losing hair, and she said it's at the point now where you have to cut it shorter just because it'll just look better.
yeah, yeah,
So
definitely. But it's actually kind of
and
funny.
it's well, I was just going to say, and like you say, it's so great because I don't do anything now. I just
Yeah.
wash my hair and dry it, and it does what it wants to do, and that's all there is to it. I don't put anything in my hair. I don't comb my hair. I don't do it, as you can probably tell right now. But it sure is nice to not futz over it.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad's hair was always like, because I was a kid back in the 70s, and his hair was longish and stuff. And all the guys at Phillips, like, that's sorry, my Phillips Petroleum, that's where my dad worked. He was a geologist. Look, would tease him about it. And it wasn't really that long, but just the times were so different. Than the guys really wore their hair fairly short. And his wasn't that long. It wasn't like a hippie or something, but it was long enough that it always like a comet. And something, and this is a good trait because my brothers have it too, is he didn't get like a receding hairline and all that at all. And same thing with my brothers. Like their hair is really so they've been able to keep it like whatever length they want. I'm sure that makes you feel better. Sorry.
No, it's
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 genetics.
yeah, of course. My dad had great hair, but he always some doctor at one point told him if you wear a hat all the time, you'll never get a cold. So my dad wore a hat all the time, right? When he'd go to work, he'd wear the hat in the office, never took the hat off. And it really wrecked his hair.
Yeah.
because his hair didn't get air and sun and all, whatever, and it got very thin, and he lost his hair kind of prematurely. Not all of it, but anyway, I'm
Yeah.
sure this is why people tuned in, was to hear us talk about our hair, and our parents' hair. Yeah, that was an important subject. We get a lot of questions about that. Can you tell us more about your dad's hair?
Well, to me, it's
Uh,
kind of funny because last week we were both having a bad hair day, so I guess it was on my mind.
okay,
And we're
well,
gonna do better with the F bombs on this episode because we had a lot of F bombs on the last episode. So we're gonna keep it G rated today.
we'll see how we do. We'll see
Yeah,
how we do. Would you like to start us off?
I will start us off. This is Bill from Centerville, Virginia. In March 2025, the world lost two artists with impacts across the noir universe. Ken Bruen, my personal favorite modern noir author, wrote of deep despair with his unique dark satire that only an Irish author can write. Robert McGinnis's beautiful artwork was imprinted on us through his many movie posters and fantastic pulp fiction novel covers. I'd love to hear of any interactions you may have had with these artists and what impact do you think they had?
Interesting. Well, obviously, thanks again, Anne, for moving a question to the top of the list, but that's somewhat timely,
Uh,
because yeah, Ken just passed away. And okay, I'll Robert McGinnis I will talk about first, because I did not know Robert McGinnis. I certainly know his work, and I have somewhere around here, I have the book, the fabulous book that was a collection of his artwork and his covers. I think it was mostly his paperback covers. And if people are not familiar with McGinnis, you would recognize him from his women. He drew women in a certain way, very, very tall, very, very lanky, like the longest legs possible on a human being. And he was just a great stylist. But all of his pulp covers featured those women. That was like his trademark. And then, of course, he also painted, I guess most famously, he painted the James Bond posters, like
oh,
Thunderball.
okay.
Uh, I think he did Goldfinger, but he definitely did Thunderball. I know that. And I think You Only Live Twice was a McGinnis poster. He did a lot of movie posters. He was just great. So I think anybody that read, you know, pulp fiction in the 60s and 70s was very familiar with McGinnis's work. Ken Bruen was a friend of mine, and I definitely, um, I really, really enjoyed Ken's books, but I probably enjoyed Ken himself even more than the books, and I felt very lucky to know him. I wish I could show I wish I was as adept at you, because I have pictures that I could have put up now of me and Ken. I think I posted one on social media the day after he passed away. Ken was so interesting because I remember that he began his career just about the same time that I did as a crime fiction writer. So we met because we went to a lot of the same conferences. That was a big thing back in the early 2000s. It still is, really, but it's interesting how they go in cycles, because it's that group that I was sort of part of that lasted from like 1999 to 2008 or something like that, was when I was mostly involved in that, the whole crime fiction community. And that was when Ken, wrote his book, The Guards, and that really put him on the map. And he was somewhat controversial because, look, he was Irish. So when you went to these things, the guys would always end up in the bar. And it was at that point, it kind of broke down along sexist lines, because the guys at these conventions would all go hang out at the bar, and the women would not, save for a precious few like Krista Faust, and who would hang with the guys. But and Ken was a master storyteller, and especially in a bar, because hey, he's Irish, you know. And I just remember a lot of people didn't like Ken because he had so many stories that people didn't believe them after a while. And the reality was is that in his younger days, Ken was a teacher and he traveled all around the world, and he ended up in a prison in Brazil that was a really bad situation. And he would tell this story, and a lot of people that I knew who were writers thought he was BSing. And like, this is what I can't stand. Why can't we just discuss our writing? You know, why do you have to be a character and have all these true to life stories? And they didn't believe that half of what Ken was saying was true. And then when you got to know Ken and he trusted you, and you know, you heard him tell you stories that were really bad, really painful about stuff that had happened to him. And you know, it was just part of his process of exorcising all of this stuff in his writing. And you know, he turned his whole life around. I mean, he was close to death's door many times, and writing saved his life. And you know, he ended up having a great career. He sold a lot of stuff to the movies, mostly in Ireland and the UK. His stuff didn't really translate over here that much because it was so Irish. Anyway, I kind of adored that guy. He was really, really great fun and hugely generous. At a certain, Ken would give, you know, he blurbed my book The Distance when the paperback edition came out, and then I was so happy about that, and then I realized like a year later that Ken blurbed everybody's book. And he said everybody that asked for a blurb, Ken would say, it's the greatest piece of writing I've read in the last 30 years, you know? And then you realize, yeah, he's said that about 10 different books. But if you were one of those 10 writers, you really appreciated it, you know? So yeah, Ken as a guy who is half Irish, I will say that Ken is almost the definitive Irishman. God love him. So there you go, Bill. That's my Ken Bruen story for you. Okay, so Joe, have you ever read any of Bruen's stuff?
I have not. I'm going to have to.
You should. You should. You know, he wrote his own series of detective stories, Jack Taylor stories, and then a bunch of standalones, and then he would do books with other writers because that's, you know, he just loved doing that. And he wrote books with Jason Starr, a writer named Jason Starr. He wrote books with another good friend of mine, Reed Farrell Coleman. And you know, he was just he was one of a kind. Okay, let's go to the next one. And this is from our pal Joe in Suffolk County, New York. He says Sarah Weinman published a detective novel starter pack in the New York Times on March 21st. The first 4 titles are tried and true classics: The Maltese Falcon, The Long Goodbye, The Galton Case by Ross MacDonald, and Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley. The next 2 titles were Sleep with Slander by Dolores Hitchens and Indemnity Only by Sara Paretsky. I plan on reading Hitchens and Paretsky based on this article. After a quick internet search, I discovered that Fool's Gold by Dolores Hitchens was the basis for the movie Band of Outsiders by Jean-Luc Godard, Bande de Part. So I'm going to start there. Which other titles, if any, would the two of you recommend from either or both of those writers? It seems the publishing industry has been more open to women than the movie industry has been. Do you think that is correct? And if so, why? Okay. Have you read anything by Dolores Hitchens or Sara Paretsky?
Yeah, I've read the Hitchens book that he mentions, that
Fool's Gold.
Fool's Gold. And yeah, I began Sara Paretsky. Yes, when the V.I. Warshawski novels first came out, I was reading them as they came out, and then but that's been a while since I've read anything of hers.
Yeah. I met Sara Paretsky, but I'm not embarrassed to say, but I haven't actually read any of her books. I am sorry to say.
Yeah, they're good books, and it's a very like, yeah, they're just, I guess what I'm just going to say is that they're good, but they're very good female detective
Right.
books, you know what I mean, where they feel really authentic and not just like trying to use a bunch of traditional
Yeah,
tropes, you know what I mean?
and I do. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. And um, Dolores Hitchens is a very interesting writer. I mean, if you, I encourage people to look her up and look at the photographs of her because she is so classically what you would imagine a woman mystery writer of that era to be, like in the 40s. Just really interesting. And those, I'm trying to remember what the other book is. This Sleep with Slander, and there was another. The guy's name is Sater, John Sater, I think, was her detective, and I think she just wrote two of those. They're set in Long Beach, and they are really good, and they're written like contemporaneous with Raymond Chandler and all that stuff, and she's really very good and was extremely prolific. I'm not entirely sure how Jean-Luc Godard came to. I do know how. I mean, the French, the directors, those guys from the Cahiers du Cinéma, they would all read whatever came out in the Série Noire.
Yeah.
The Gallimard, the publisher, would publish these books in the Série Noire, and they would comb through them looking for books that were camera ready for their low budget films. So I'm sure that's how Godard came to across that book. How close it is to the movie, I don't know, but that was also the case with Pierrot Le Fou, that he
Yeah.
did with Belmondo and Anna Karina. That is, I think that's a Lionel White story that he adapted. And anyway, the the observation that Joe makes about uh, more women writers in publishing, or the movies haven't been as good to female writers, crime writers, and mystery writers, is absolutely true because there's way more women in publishing than there are in the movie business in positions of authority. My career in publishing is entirely due to women, entirely. I mean, my agent was a woman. All of my editors have been women, except for Gordon Van Gelder, who was the original editor of the first of the Dark City book. Was like the only male editor I think I had. It's all been women, because newsflash, women read much more than men, and so I learned entering the business that um, they would say 4 out of 5 readers of mystery novels are women. So interestingly, as that developed in the publishing business, I think it was only natural that more female crime and mystery writers would appear um, in the latter part of the last century. They were always there, Lee Brackett and Dolores Hitchens and Dorothy Hughes and
Uh,
Patricia Highsmith,
Agatha Christie,
Agatha
who's the
Christie.
highest
Yeah, of
selling
course, the
author
biggest
of all
selling one
time.
of all. So they've always been there, but as I've claimed about uh, cinema scholarship, the history gets written by men.
Yeah.
The books may be written by men and women equally, but the history was written by men, and the men tended to favor, talking about other men. That's why you never see Patricia Highsmith in the top 5 of noir writers, is because it's always the same 4 or 5 guys that they talk about, right?
And
but
I think it's indicative Woolrich is not talked about as much, and he was queer, which I think is I
yeah,
feel it's
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
making
if you
sense.
put him in the top five, and I don't want
Yeah,
to get into I don't
yeah,
like the listing
yeah.
thing, but so is Patricia Highsmith,
Hmm.
and what for whatever purpose that serves, I don't know, but
Yeah.
um, I just I think that it was really great that in the time I was doing this, like I mentioned about those conventions, how they would break down along sexist lines, that is pretty much gone. That is pretty much fallen by the wayside in the crime writing community. Uh, I mean, I still read crime fiction, and I can tell you that when I started out, it was like, I'm going to read a book by a woman. Oh boy, this is going to be different.
Yeah.
And now it's just like half the books I read are by women, and
Yeah.
it's not. I don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And there used to be. This is funny. There used to be. I used to go to this bar in San Francisco, the Ha Ra, down in the Tenderloin. Do you
Yes,
ever go? It's still there.
it's right around the corner from where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, it was owned by guys named Harry and Ray, and that was
Oh, that's
why
how I
it's
got the
called the
name.
Ha
Okay.
Ra, right? And one of those guys owned the American Graffiti hot rod, the
Oh,
the the car that Paul Lamont drove in American Graffiti. One of the guys who owned that bar owned that car. That was his claim to fame. And there was a bartender there named Carl Kickery, who was a huge fan of crime fiction. So we would get into these big discussions about what have you read lately and everything. And he was the most sexist goofball. I really loved the guy. He was such a character. Uh, but he would argue all the time that women can't write crime fiction. And so every time I had, Krista Faust or um, Denise Mina or Megan Abbott or somebody would come to San Francisco, I take them to the Hara and introduce them to Carl, and it's absurd to think that women cannot do this as well or better than guys.
well, and
Laura
it's
Laura
yeah.
Lippman is another one. Laura Lippman is somebody that I met when I first broke in, and she is like an all timer. She has written so prolific, and her books are so fantastic, and just a good person as well. Um, anyway,
Yeah, and there's a lot of women crime writers, and there just always has been. I mean, it's one of the fields of writing where I feel like there's always been a huge amount of women writers. And just for anybody who wants to kind of read maybe more classic era women writers, I mean, Charlotte Armstrong is like one of my favorite writers of all time. I think she's somebody that I can't believe because she was extremely prominent when she was writing, but
yes,
that she is someone that I don't think people know as well anymore, and she's a really great writer.
yeah, she wrote the stories that the Unsuspected, the movie The
Hmm.
Unsuspected is Charlotte Armstrong, and um, the movie Don't Bother to Knock with Marilyn Monroe,
Yeah,
that's a Charlotte Armstrong
which has a
story.
very different ending in the story. The I love the end in the story in the original
It's a
story.
different type. It's called Mischief. The
Yeah.
novel is called Mischief. Yeah, and we're not gonna talk about the ending
The
though
ending,
because I
but
want
it's
to don't
it's
want to
it's,
spoil it.
it's, it's the POV and the ending in it are very different from in the
Yes,
movie.
yes,
And it's great when you read it. And you see why they didn't adapt it that way, but you really wish they had.
yeah. Well, there are a lot of endings like that from that era.
Yeah.
Anyway, so good on you. Joe, you should read those and more. Amongst the, I think I mentioned this on an earlier episode, but um, it didn't get a lot of press for some reason. But the Chandler estate decided to have Denise Mina write the new Philip Marlowe novels,
Yeah.
right? And you know, what's his name? John Banville, under the name Benjamin Black, was doing it, and I didn't think they were particularly good.
Yeah, I
I
read
didn't like, I didn't like his approach, and I thought he was clearly laboring to imitate Chandler.
Yeah.
And I read Denise's book, The Second Murderer, I think it's called. I got that around here too somewhere. And I really enjoyed it because I think she accomplished something very difficult to pull off, which was she consciously took Marlowe into parts of Los Angeles that Chandler never took him to.
Yeah.
Because she wanted to say, there is a Hispanic subculture in Los Angeles in the
Yeah.
40s that you're completely ignoring.
Hmm.
And she writes much, much stronger female characters
Yeah.
than Chandler ever could. And I thought the book was really enjoyable and very entertaining, and I look forward to the next one. And Denise is one of all the people I met in, as a colleague in the crime fiction community. Denise was really one of my favorites. She's just a delightful person. Scott, she's a Scot, and just really, really terrific. So, I recommend her books very highly. She wrote a series of mystery novels featuring a woman reporter, newspaper reporter, that were right in my wheelhouse, and they're just fantastic. And the Garnet Hill trilogy that kind of put her on the map is sensational as well. So big Denise Mina fan. Mina, for those of you wondering. And then another Denise Hamilton, is also a really good mystery writer. She's also a friend of mine. We had the same editor when we broke in. Our books came out exactly at the same time with the same editor, and Denise is just terrific. I haven't talked to her in a while. I need to contact her. And Steph Cha, Steph Cha in L.A. does a good detective series, and she's like a Asian woman writing like Raymond Chandler, and it's really good. She's terrific. And of course, my buddy Krista Faust. If you
Yeah.
want a porn star as your detective, Krista Faust is the person you need.
Huh.
So yeah, Angel Dare. That's her.
That's a great name.
That's her character. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay. Where are we? Oh, question 3. We need to speed up. So many books. So
Because I'm just running down the list of all these people that you should read. Okay, I'll pick
yeah,
up
that's
the
great.
pace.
That's great. No, I wonder if people can tell the difference because we're filming on a Sunday afternoon, as opposed to we usually shoot on at night after I've been at work and stuff. So I think we're a little more lax because of time of day. Let's see. This is from Steve in Exeter, New Hampshire. So many books, so little time. Is there a book spanning from here to there that either of you find incredible that it was never made into a film, that you find incredible that it was never made into a film noir? I have one in mind for years. I believe The Sopranos and others have stolen a little from it. It's a giant, overwritten, poorly edited tome entitled The Death of the Detective by Mark Smith.
Oh yeah.
It almost won the 1974 National Book Award, but Gravity's Rainbow beat it.
Well, Joe, I'll tell you, it's funny that he says, yeah, they should make this into a movie because it's poorly edited and it's overwritten. But I'm not going to disagree because I remember it came out like in 74. Yeah. And I remember that was just about the time I was starting to get into, mystery fiction and all that. And because that was the year of Chinatown, right? And
Yeah.
Chinatown is the thing that ignited the fuse for me. And then I was reading Hammett and Chandler and all this stuff. And then there was this big book, and I could not get through it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Mark Smith was a professor of English, and
Yeah.
that became pretty obvious about 100 pages into the book. It's like it was just too much. He was clearly setting out to turn crime fiction into literature.
Yeah.
And I like crime fiction that doesn't try that hard.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, you know what the difference is between genre fiction and literature, right?
No. Tell me.
Plot.
Yeah.
that is the difference, right? Genre fiction has to have a plot.
Yeah.
Literature does not have to have a plot, right? So it's you get these weird exercises when people are like inspired by crime fiction, but then they still want to be literary, and it can be a very uncomfortable mix. Some
Yeah.
people do it really well. Dennis Lehane has like left genre fiction behind, and now he writes, you know, historical novels, but they have a plot, right? So that's the thing. Genre fiction is all about turning the pages, get to the end, and then if you're good, you get to sell another book. And then then people start devouring them, and then if you're bad, people at some point realize they're reading the same book over and over and over again, and then they go find a new author to read. The trick is to not make it feel like you're just repeating the same thing. If you're lucky enough to have a series character or something like that.
Yeah. And I think too, sometimes genre writers get like underestimated, because I think like a lot of times, like with Agatha Christie, I've seen a couple things with her. One is like, oh, she just writes really good puzzles, and it's like, okay, yeah, her plotting is great, in but she's also her characters are really vivid.
Yeah.
Like, I really recommend if for people to read Death on the Nile, because the character work that's amazing, because the murder doesn't happen until quite a far away into the book, and it's really about these different people and the relationships and things like that. I mean, I think she's very underestimated. And of course, now for some reason, Sarah Phillips, who I despise, who's the woman that's been producing all the Christie adaptations lately, for some reason, she doesn't think Christie is dark, so she throws in all this like really ugly stuff, and it's like she wrote the first slasher novel, and everyone who dies in that novel is a terrible friggin' person. She's plenty dark. You don't have to like add
Yeah.
stuff to your adaptation because you don't think it's dark enough. Especially her adaptation, Witness for the Prosecution, which especially, I mean, of course, you can't help but compare it to the film, which is,
Right.
brilliant and definitely one of the greatest Christie adaptations. But her go at it was just to make everything sort of ugly and run down. And it's like, this doesn't make it deep. Making things ugly and run down doesn't make it deep, okay?
Oh boy, is that ever true? Yeah.
It just reminds you
Good
what
observation.
what the butler says to Sullivan, about portraying
Mhm.
poverty, yeah. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Is there a book that you would like to see? Because that was the start of
Yeah, yeah. The
that's never
17
been made into a film.
the 17 Widows of Sanssouci by Charlotte Armstrong, which is a really, really interesting book. It is a crime novel, but it's a lot about it's sort of this woman moves from like New York to Pasadena, and she kind of moves into this apartment building, and it's all filled with widows. And it's sort of about the dynamics of the women and stuff like that, and friendships that spring up and all this stuff. And there is a mystery to it too. And I would love to see that. But because it'd make it great, you could probably do it over a couple episodes and just now, and just fill it with really great actresses. It'd be so good. You might have to move it to England to get enough older actresses to fill out the plot, since
That sounds pretty
America just
good.
yeah, it's a great story. It's really interesting. Yeah.
That makes me laugh because Dark City Dames just came out. The new edition of it just came out last week, and
See, those ladies when they were older would have been perfect for it.
that's why I brought it up. We actually talked about that because I did have that conversation. Like, I should write a script about these women all in like a retirement community where a murder happens, and they have to, you know, however it works. It's just like murder in the old folks' home.
Yeah.
And of course, some of them thought that was a good idea, and some of them were like, I'm not playing an old lady in an old folks home. I mean, Audrey Totter was all for it. She was
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, you write that and tell them that." And it's like, but then they would laugh and say, yeah, because somebody's going to give you money because we're in it.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. But it was a fun thing to think about.
Yeah, I always had an idea for a movie where all these sort of older B actresses, like Mary Warnoff and some other women like that, maybe Pam Grier, like kidnap Meryl Streep because she's taking all the older women roles.
That's a great idea, Anne. That is a great idea. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk
Okay.
about off camera. But somebody asked this question. We had this question before, something similar to this, like something that you would love to see made that was never made. My usual answer was always Red Harvest, Hammett's Red Harvest, because it came so close to being done several times by really good filmmakers. But then I usually say a book by Jonathan Latimer called Solomon's Vineyard,
Mm-hmm.
which was banned in this country when it was first written. And I remember saying that because I thought, yeah, I love Latimer, and I was so intrigued by this book being banned. And it was somewhat ahead of its time because it's about a religious cult and a detective who shows up in this town and gets involved in all the doings with this religious cult that's like taking over the town. And it's really kind of kinky and weird, and there's a lot of violence in it and some perversity, and it's fun. And so I read it again and was even more convinced that this would make a great film. I mean, it would be so pulpy and just perfect. It's like, oh my God, if somebody could have made this, 20 years ago or something, and Walter Hill could have directed it just perfectly. It's a little bit like Last Man Standing, which is a lot like Red Harvest. It's like the lone guy comes into town and sets everybody spinning against each other, and there's just a lot of violence and a lot of sex. What's not to like? So I'm still holding on to that one, Solomon's Vineyard. If you can find a copy of it, I highly recommend it. Okay. Our pal Doug in Silver Spring, Maryland says, I believe that Darren McGavin is one of the most underrated of film noir icons. I'm going to take exception to Darren McGavin even being considered a film noir icon, but I get where you're going with this, Doug. And I also think that he still remains the definitive Mike Hammer. What do the two of you think about Darren McGavin's work? And is there any chance of showing Paul Wenkos's The Case Against Brooklyn on Noir Alley? We'll get that one out of the way quickly. If it ever popped up as available to show, I would snap it up immediately. So yeah, but as of yet, I have not seen it on any of the lists that I get to draw from. So, but those change year to year. So that's that. Okay. I know you're a Darren McGavin fan.
I am.
so I'm gonna let you handle this one.
I was so excited when I saw this question. I would not call Darren McGavin a noir icon, just to put that out of the way. But he is one of my all-time favorite actors. Obviously, I'm a huge Night Stalker fan, which my parents let me watch. We would watch that together as family, though I was really young. But it's so when he mentioned him as Hammer, yes, that is my favorite of all the Hammer
Yeah,
adaptations.
he's really good. Yeah,
Because he's really great in it. But also with that, when my parents first met each other, they watched that together. They would watch that together when it was broadcast. So so when I learned that, of course, it became even more special to me. Yeah, fun fact about my parents. My father asked my mother to marry him on their third date.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
She did not say yes then, but he kept after her.
For how long? How long did it take before she said yes?
Not that long, right? Because they dated for I think a few months, and then he went out on his field work because he was getting his master's in geology. Yeah, it was a whirlwind romance. I mean, they were married within a year of meeting each other.
And how long were they together?
Until my father's death, over 50 years.
Wow. fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. And at their 50th wedding anniversary, my dad's toast was, "I was smitten the day I met her, and I'm still smitten now."
Nice. I thought you were going to do the Bogart line from In a Lonely Place there. I was born when she kissed me. I died when she left me. I lived a few weeks while she loved me. But that's a brief romance, not a 50-year union, you know.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing that, Anne. That's
Yeah.
fabulous. Well, you know, I'm thinking if Kathleen and I manage to scrape out another 10 years, you know, not just being married, just living,
Living.
you know, we'll hit that 50 mark at some point.
Yeah.
That's pretty I never in the world would have imagined that I'd be married for 50 years, you know, but it's visible in the future right now. Um Darren McGavin, yeah, I always have liked Darren McGavin, and I especially liked it when I found out that he was about his childhood. Do you know about his childhood? That he
No,
was
I don't know. I don't know anything about him biographically. I just love him so much as an
he was
actor.
from Spokane, Washington, and he was basically a runaway. I
Mm-mm.
mean, he was kind of a broken home, and he was a runaway when he was a little kid, and he like lived in the Bay Area here under bridges and stuff as a young boy. And he finally made his way to LA, and he got a job in Hollywood as a scene painter at Columbia. That's where he started in the movie business, was painting sets and things at Columbia. And then he just hanging around, there was an audition, and he said, "Hell, I can do that." And he went and auditioned for a movie and got the part. And then said, "Oh, I should take this seriously." And then he went to New York and got stage roles for like 3 or 4 years, and then came back to Hollywood and was acting ever since. You know,
Yeah.
he is really good. He's great in the Man with the Golden Arm. You know,
I still haven't watched that because I know he's a very not good person in that.
he's
It's
a
like
real sleaze.
yeah.
Yeah, he's
And it's like I keep putting it off because of that. Like I really want to watch it because I
yeah,
want to
he's
see him
Frank
in it.
Sinatra's
Yeah.
connection in that
Yeah, he's a
film. You know,
yeah.
yeah. And he was also, one other thing I always liked about him is I liked his wife. Kathy Brown was an actress who was married for many, many years to Darren McGavin, and she's pretty cool as well. She's in those two Irving Lerner films, Murder by Contract and City of Fear, the two Vince Edwards movies.
Yeah.
She's in both of them, and she's really good. In and she's in a lot of, she did all kinds of TV, and she's in, you know, all of the TV shows that Darren McGavin did, and there were a
Yeah.
lot of them.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it wasn't just Kolchak, the Night Stalker. I mean, he was in a lot of TV shows, and she was in if he was involved in it, she was involved in it, and yeah, she was pretty dishy, I gotta say.
No.
Um, okay, is it who
Me.
you're
It's
reading
me.
this?
So this is our friend Carlton in Atlanta, Georgia. If you were to gather the greatest scores of noir movies, which ones would make the cut for a collection? What would be the genre? I assume they mean the style of music.
Okay, that kind of confused. So I guess what he's saying is classical scores or jazz scores or what kind of, anyway. Well, um, Carlton, you need to find these because they're all over the place. These I know he's asking us what we would choose,
Yeah.
but you can get virtually any score for any film noir. It's available. You can find them. I mean, I have a whole wall over here of CDs, and there are so many collections of film noir scores. There's a big film noir box set. And then you can just get the individual, uh, scores. Like, and I love the jazz scores, from the 50s are probably my favorites. I prefer them to the orchestral scores. My friend Steve Smith, if he's watching now, is wincing because he's a huge fan of, he's written biographies of Bernard Herrmann and Max Steiner, and he knows everything about Miklos Rozsa and Franz Waxman, and all of those scores are fantastic. um, but I put on the jazzy ones. I put
Yeah.
on the Modern Jazz Quartet, Odds Against Tomorrow, and Duke Ellington's Anatomy of a Murder. Obviously, the Miles Davis score for Elevator to the Gallows. These are my favorite scores. But I can't remember the names of these, and I don't want to waste time reaching over there. But there are a lot. In fact, there's one that came out. Well, no, that wasn't. There was one I loved it was called Pop Fiction, that was music selected from newer noir films, and or just inspired by noir films or something. That was a good one that I play quite a bit. Anyway, there's these are available, Carlton, and
Doing
you
to my
should do a
couch.
little research,
Sorry.
and you can get it all. You can get the old classic stuff, all those. I even have a collection of like Roy Webb scores, and yeah, you just got to do a little research.
I don't really know anything about film scores. That is not a. I hate to say it, but most of the film score stuff I listen to is from horror films, like either Carpenter or from
No one
Giallo
is surprised
films.
to hear
Yeah.
that, and
I
I'm
stop
curious as
destroying
to
my
how
character.
many
Sorry.
how many film directors also do the scores for their movies. I mean, I'm curious
Besides Carpenter, yeah,
because
I
I know
mean,
John Carpenter is one,
yeah.
and to some extent, I know that David Lynch is. I mean, Angelo
He,
Badalamenti gets the credit, but I know that David Lynch is deeply involved
yeah.
in scoring his films. Or was. Um, but I'm just curious as to who some of the other directors, filmmakers would be that have done their own scores. Um,
Yeah, if people know, they should put it in the Facebook comments or drop us an email or something. I'd be interested in that too because there's like I know there's somebody else that I'm not thinking of, and I don't know who that is. There's at least one other person that I know of, but it's just like
yeah.
it's not it's somewhere deep in my brain.
I will say one thing about this, just taking off on a tangent from this question. I think that film scoring, the 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 music in older films is pretty fantastic in its own right, but I think film scoring has just improved immeasurably over the years because the music is so much more integrated into the movies now than it was then. Because then, in factory style filmmaking, they'd shoot the whole thing and then they'd give it to the composer who would do a very timed out score with the studio orchestra to accentuate what was in the film. But um it wasn't until like the later 50s that directors started working with composers early on in the process to say, how can we integrate the music more effectively so that it's actually part of the film? And Robert Wise was a big proponent of this. And a film like I Want to Live and Odds Against Tomorrow, he was working with the composers. Johnny Mandel, in the case of I Want to Live, he was working with them much earlier than than was typical,
Yeah.
saying, read the script, go over all of this, let's talk about what it's going to sound like, and I'm going to tell you what it's going to look like and what my ideas are, so we can really effectively integrate all of this. And now I just think film music now is better than ever, uh,
Yeah.
because the scores are just so evocative, and they're woven into the fabric of the film, uh, in a much more interesting way than the music used to be overlaid on the film or would play under it. Right now, it's just like part of it, and I think it's very effective when it's done right.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I was watching a short interview with the guy who now leads Goblin. I've seen them play live. It's really amazing. And so for people don't know, they're an Italian band and they wound up scoring a lot of films. And he was talking about that they
Suspiria, most famously.
this most famous, even though that's not my favorite score from Argento, but it is the Deep Red's my favorite score. But it was interesting. He was talking about being a sideman because they worked on a film, and he was that. Now, I was watching the film, and they had a special interview. And he was talking about the fact that another composer wrote the pieces, and then they played them. But he was talking about for a long time in Giallo, at least, there'd just be a set number of pieces for a film, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to it really being scored. And then, of course, they worked for Argento and they really scored his films, where they were matching the music to what was going on in the film and stuff. And it wasn't just like sort of ordered pieces that you would put in here and there, which explains it. Because sometimes in Giallo films, there'll be really weird music choices.
Yeah, yeah. It's always kind of cool when you're surprised uh by a score, and when filmmakers latch on to, like, Tangerine Dream was just a thing for
Yeah.
a while there. Everybody wanted Tangerine Dream to do their score, right? And Thief is fantastic score. Sorcerer, one of my favorite scores of all time.
Manhunter.
uh yes, and Miracle Miles, Steve Desjarnatt's great film, also has a Tangerine Dream score. Those are all fantastic. Anyway, it is interesting because the thing I just read the other day had to do with White Lotus. You don't watch White
No,
Lotus,
I have not watched it. Yeah.
but there was a story about how the writer, producer, director Mike White and the composer, whose name I can't remember right now, had a big falling out because they had a huge creative difference over the way the music was used in the show. And apparently, the guy composed what he thought was the perfect score, and Mike White wanted to add voices, like ethereal voices, to the score. And the composer was like, I quit. I'm done. And he's not coming back to do the next season of the show. But that was an example of how that music was so entwined in everything that happened in the show that it's impossible to not. When I think about it, I hear it.
Yeah.
As much as what I remember seeing, I remember hearing, and that's a big accomplishment.
Yeah, I just want to make a complaint. So, I don't know. Have you watched The Bear? Which is that it's that
I started to watch The Bear.
they're terrible with overlaying songs. It's like hire a composer
Yeah, yeah.
because the songs are so distracting when you're watching that show, especially for montages and stuff. And the songs aren't always good choices. And it got to the point and then I started complaining about it, and it's so funny because I was just like, okay, if you're gonna go this route, then go watch like Better Call Saul and really learn how to do this. If you're gonna use
Yeah, I hear you.
pop music into your show, it's gotta work,
Well,
and they don't,
that
yeah,
became a real thing because it's a money making thing.
yeah,
If you get the rights to these songs, and then you can put out a soundtrack collection, a
yeah,
collection of stuff, music on the soundtrack. And it's a big deal for the artist to get their song. It can make or break a performer if they get a song on a TV show or
yeah.
something. But I know exactly what you mean, because at a certain point, it's just, oh my God, it becomes a gimmick, and a crutch for, like.
And a lazy crutch.
Exactly, exactly. And
Even I
and
do,
I
yeah.
and it's also weird because I remember when I was a kid, um, the first movie that really made that happen. And this is something that people always talk about, how George Lucas changed the film business, right? How Star Wars changed the film business. They forget that American Graffiti changed the film business because of the soundtrack.
Yeah.
because he got the rights to all of those old 45s and had them playing. That was the soundtrack.
Yeah.
The radio was on constantly playing those songs, and then they had a double album that
I remember that
probably
album.
sold as many people bought the album as saw the movie. Right? People forget that American Graffiti, for a brief time, was one of the 10 highest grossing movies of all time. Right? And everybody who saw it bought that double album. And after that, it was like, this is how you do it.
Oh,
Right? You include the pop songs in the movie because we're going to get an album out of it, right? And make more money on the back end.
oh.
So that was one other way that George Lucas changed the business completely.
And I was just going to say for people too, the Penguin uses songs extremely effectively because they're mostly, almost all of them are at the end credits and reflect back sort of what happened in the story. And then there's a few that are used during the episode, but very, very few. So that's a way, like I said, you look at that or Better Call Saul, the effectiveness of how they do that kind of music into the story really it can be really effective, but I hate it when it just feels like clumped in there.
And I will move on to the next
Yeah,
question,
sorry.
but I want to make one final observation that I think is interesting. Um, I talk a lot about watching MHZ, the network with
Yeah.
all the foreign television shows and things. And they're not all television shows. There's some movies on there as well. But it's so interesting to me that when I watch crime shows from other parts of the world, almost all of them have American jazz. Like there's a
Oh,
club or something where the private eye goes and hangs out at the jazz club, you know? And it's uncanny how to realize how American jazz overseas is America's greatest export,
yeah.
at least in terms of art, because it's in all of these shows. Whereas nobody in America listens, there's no scene in
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
American movie of
Yeah.
anybody listening to jazz or that they're spending the time to like actually focus on the band
Yeah.
in the scene and like it becomes the point of the scene and then the camera drifts over to the detective and his conversation and everything, but like they really feature the music, and I just find that fascinating that in this country we don't appreciate it like the people overseas. Anyway, we better move on.
We better move on.
um,
Okay. See you, question 6.
oh, okay, this is from Barbara. I don't know where Barbara is from or any of that stuff, but Barbara, God bless you. I saw The Big Caper on Prime last week and was favorably impressed. Have you seen it? And if so, what did you think of it? I don't see it mentioned in any film noir books. Barbara, you missed a Noir Alley when I showed The Big Caper. I have actually shown that on TCM. And for all I know, I don't know how old this question is from Barbara, but somebody somewhere along the line sent me an email and said, have you ever seen The Big Caper? I think you should show it on TCM. And I went and looked at it on Prime because I hadn't seen it. And I said, this is kind of interesting. And lo and behold, because just as Barbara is suggesting, it never gets mentioned in any noir books or anything. I looked it up on the TCM database and it's like, oh, I can actually show this. So I did. And it is based on a Lionel White novel, but I'm going to say it's one of the lesser adaptations, because he had a lot of books adapted in the late 50s and early 60s. The Killing is a Lionel White story. And I thought that the movie could have been a lot better than it was. There's some good stuff in it. You haven't seen it, have
I
you?
have not seen it. No.
It's Rory Calhoun, and it's
I
a
like him.
heist movie, and Rory Calhoun is the star, and James Gregory is the villain. They're all villains. In Lionel White stories, it's all villains. There are no good guys in a Lionel White story. And and it was interesting, interesting movie that was less than the sum of its parts, with some perverted stuff in it that was kind of fun, but it and it was directed by this guy Robert Stevens, who directed more episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents than anybody else. So I had expectations for it that were unfulfilled, because I don't think he was as adept at carrying a longer story, and it just didn't have the momentum, or interesting things, no momentum. Anyway, so that's the big caper. But if Barbara, if you're interested, you could probably go on YouTube and find my intro and outro for that film, because I did have a lot of fun talking about Rory Calhoun and his his delinquency and his life of petty crime before he became an actor.
really? I didn't know that about him.
Oh yeah. He was at the big I can't remember the name of it now, but he was in a boys' reformatory.
Oh, wow.
Not I've visited there. I actually went to see this place in central. It's in the middle of California, and he escaped from there. I mean, he was a badass. Rory Calhoun was a badass, and good thing he had a movie career. He could have kept him off the streets. Anyway, that was. Is it you reading?
It's me. This is our friend Michael from Post Falls, Idaho.
Wouldn't be an Ask Eddie if it wasn't if Michael didn't have a question in there.
Yes, anyone to let Michael know that I did remember to tell Eddie that Valentina Cortese was in The Possessed.
Yes.
We talked about before we started filming.
Thank you for cluing me in on that. If Valentina was in it, I will find it and watch it.
Yeah. After watching Kino Lorber's restored Black Tuesday on Blu-ray, a vast improvement upon my first viewing of the film, my thought was, wouldn't this make a great double bill with White Heat? Were there any better portrayals of psychopathic behavior in noir as Edward G. Robinson's Vincent Kennelly and James Cagney's Cody Jarrett?
Well, those are big psychopathic performances, and I'm so happy that Black Tuesday has been resurrected, and I want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague Ehsan Hoshbach, who works at the Il Cinema, is one of the programmers of the Il Cinema Ritrovato Festival now in Italy, and Ehsan was, I believe, the person who was most responsible for the resurrection of Black Tuesday, because he was determined to put together a Ugo Fregonesi retrospective in Bologna, and that was the film that was really, really vexing to find. I have no idea what happened to it, because I remember showing it like 20 years ago at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, after which it became impossible to find. And somehow Ehsan made it happen that the film got restored so it could be shown in Bologna. And then Kino Lorber was able to license it and put that restoration out on Blu-ray. So congratulations for that, because it's a really it's a tough movie. I mean, you did you see it when we showed it at North City?
Yeah, I did. It was really good.
Yeah, and Edward G. Robinson is incredible in it, and the Stanley Cortez cinematography is sensational, and the movie is just so mean. It is so brutal, and it's so that would be an almost unbearable double bill. Quite honestly, Michael.
Yeah.
You'd stagger out of the theater, and you couldn't hear for all the gunfire.
Eddie, you have
Tuesday. Oh my God.
Yeah, you have to watch The Penguin. You've got to watch the series.
Okay. All right. I don't need too much. How many episodes is it?
It's 8. It goes by really fast.
Okay.
But
all right, sure, I love Colin Farrell, even though you don't know it's Colin Farrell.
He's amazing, and he is up there with these two guys in
Okay,
terms of
fantastic.
psychopaths. That's why this popped into my head. I also wanted to tell you that Valentina is also in another giallo with John Saxon, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, also known as The Evil Eye.
Okay. Well, geez, I have so much I have to watch.
I know, it's crazy. Giving you things to
Um,
watch.
uh, yeah, psychopathic behavior. I also, just on a different level, he's not a ranter, but Lawrence Tierney in Born to Kill
Oh,
is one of
and
my
her,
favorite.
not just Lawrence Tierney,
Yes,
but
yes. I
also
mean, she's
Claire
a psychopath
Trevor.
as well, but very, very stylish and uh, a little more sedate in her psychopathy.
Except
But
for the hats. The hats give her away. Only an insane woman would wear those hats.
I'm sure there are other ones that I'm kind of spacing out on right now, but
Oh, Uncle Charlie.
yes, Uncle. But see, that's suave and debonair psychopath, but
But really, really dangerous. Like when
the
he's
really, really dangerous.
scary in that movie, he is so scary.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. Um, all right, now, Chris. I know Charlotte has been is that who that is that's jumping up and down?
No, this is Tyrion and his sister have been going at it on my furniture for the last half hour,
Oh
finding
my God.
different things to rip up and knock over.
Okay. Well,
Yes,
as long as you stay upright, we're fine.
we're okay. And
Okay.
no one's pulled out my mic, so
Okay. Very good. Chris wants to know if we consider Night Has a Thousand Eyes to be noir. And then this is funny. He says, "I know you don't consider cat people to be noir, but I think people will turn into cats before they can tell the future." Um, I would hope so. I mean, but uh, yeah, of course, I consider Night Has a Thousand Eyes to be film noir. Be, what's your take on that film, man? You
oh,
did
I
you
think it's a
enjoy it?
film noir too, because even though it's seeing the future, it's also destroying his life. Right.
Yeah,
So that, which is
exactly.
a very noir thing. You have this incredible gift, except it isn't an incredible gift, and he has to like hide himself away until he's sort of forced into acting on something. He winds up near what's the neighborhood where Angels Flight is?
Bunker Hill.
Bunker Hill. And it's a very noir story. Yeah.
It, and it's interesting because Cornell Woolrich, who wrote that,
Yeah.
didn't really do much supernatural stuff,
No.
or when he did, it was always sort of like, is this really supernatural, or is there some rational explanation for
Yeah.
what's going on here? Like the Leopard Man, is like that. And even though I don't consider the cat people to be um, film noir, I certainly consider it noir adjacent, because all those Val Lewton movies are, because
Yeah.
that approach to directing and that visual style had so much to do with the development of film noir that to exclude those films seems ridiculous. And to me, the point you were making is spot on, that Woolrich, I think he imagined what would be the worst curse a person could have, and it would be to see the future. It's to know what's going to happen to people and not be able to do anything to prevent it
Yeah.
would be like the most horrible thing imaginable, which is also the premise of Stephen King's The Dead Zone, which
Yeah.
nobody considers that to be a film noir necessarily. I mean,
It's
although
they think you make a really good argument. It's a neo noir.
well, we did in the Noir
Oh,
City
did you
magazine
guys? Yeah, somebody
when
did.
we
Yeah,
did the story on David Cronenberg. I mean,
yeah.
the Dead Zone took up a lot of that. Uh, but I do just think, because it was made, in 48 at the kind of the height of the noir movement, and it had, John Seitz's incredible cinematography. There is the pall of death in that movie is palpable, more than in most noir films. It just, there's a feeling of doom over that whole thing, and which is amazing considering how utterly preposterous the story is.
Yeah.
That John Farrow manages to convince you that all this stuff is possible. And, I think Gail Russell gives a really, dare I say, a haunted performance in that movie. And Robinson is great in it. And so, yeah, I don't have any problem considering that movie to be film noir, even though there is the supernatural element to it.
Okay, this is going to be from our friend Jan in Stockholm, Sweden. And this is a couple of questions, but they're so interrelated, I decided just to throw them in together.
Okay.
Okay, so one, have you watched John Cromwell's last film, A Matter of Morals, made in Sweden, released in 1960? Is it a noir?
I have not seen it.
All
So
right.
I'm kind of curious if Jan has seen it, and whether he's like asking, is it a noir because he hasn't seen it, or has he seen it and is wondering if we think it's a noir. So I kind of wish that Jan had answered his own question, like he thinks it is or whatever, but maybe he hasn't seen it. I don't know.
Okay, and the next question is, when you answered a question about Cromwell's second to last film, The Scavengers, you said that you didn't know why he directed that film, but do you have any guess why his two last films were B movies made abroad from the United States? After all, he had been lifted from the blacklist by then and made a comeback in Hollywood with The Goddess, 1958. So it's probably not because of the blacklist. What do you think?
I think he probably wasn't getting work in America, and there might be some. I don't know the answer. I'm just speculating that it might be that there was something that took him to Sweden, and he made himself available to direct movies, and they thought, hey, this Hollywood director, this is good. Let's hire this guy. That's all I can imagine, and I'm very curious about A Matter of Morals. I don't really know much about the movie, and I'm gonna have to look it up and see what that's all about. Because yeah, after his noir stuff, I mean, after his blacklisting, after he made Caged, I don't know that I've seen anything of John Cromwell's after that. Like I have not seen The Goddess, so I don't know if it's any good or whatever. And I'm glad he got work again, but I don't know much about his career, like post Blacklist.
And then the last related question, perhaps you could ask his son James Cromwell about this. Have you in the F&F tried to get an interview with him about his father's noirs, as well as the ones he himself has been in as an actor? I'm thinking especially about LA Confidential.
Okay, well, Anne, this is our mission. I know you're going to the TCM Classic Film Festival, and
Yeah.
I am too. And James Cromwell will be there. He'll be introducing Babe.
Oh,
So one of us may indeed have the opportunity to ask him this question, but that's it. I mean, I don't have anything else to add because I have not met James Cromwell, but he is kind of considered a quote unquote friend of TCM. And yeah, he's coming to the festival to introduce Babe. I'm thinking they're also taking advantage of that to have him introduce one of his dad's movies. But off the top of my head, I cannot remember what it is. So I'm not entirely sure.
and I had no idea that they were related because I never.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's like I miss out on these things.
You would understand it if you look at a picture of John Cromwell.
I would see the resemblance.
You will see the resemblance. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last question. This is Britt in Lynchburg, Virginia, and this is specifically for you. Says, Anne, I know you've contributed to the Noir City magazine. I can't remember you mentioning if you'd ever written any fiction. Have you penned your own, he says specifically, crime, or I shouldn't say he, Brit could very well be a woman. I don't
Yeah.
understand why I'm saying Brit as a guy. I mean, Brit sounds more like a feminine name than a guy name.
Brett Eklund.
And this, if you've watched Severance at all, there's this Brit Lower who's on the show. She's great. Anyway, have you penned your own crime fiction or horror stories, perhaps? Well, you were just starting to write one on this show. You came up with an idea for a story that was pretty good. So maybe if you hadn't done it before, maybe you can start now.
Yeah, I do some writing. I've been kind of off of it. It comes in waves just depending on my schedule. But no, I don't actually write mystery or horror. It's more kind of depressing drama. Believe it or not. It's not genre fiction really.
And is it fiction or is it memoir?
Fiction, even though at some point I should write down some of my stories. A friend of mine's actually trying to get a screenplay produced about his own life, but there's a big section of it from when a section of it is about him coming to London and going to the American school in London and like essentially meeting as the group of my group of friends that he sort of integrated into. And it was so funny because like I was reading like parts of his screenplay and I just kept saying, was Patrick, this was a mutual friend of ours, was he really like that? And he was like, yeah. And it was, and I realized, oh, that's because I remembered our friend from when he was a freshman in high school when we first met. And he was very different then. He became much more brash. So like when I was reading like my friend's screenplay, the way he was, oh, that's right. He had this big that's I'm remembering him sort of when he was that more vulnerable part of him that was really shed by the time our friend,
I see. Yeah.
because we're all seniors in high school when the guy who wrote the screenplay actually came in with us. But it was very, yeah, it was interesting, yeah, to kind of because obviously it's not like of course parts are fictionalized and people are combined in this and
Of course. Of
that.
course.
And then I was like reading part of it. It was so hilarious because of course it was in the so American School in London, we had a smoking area called the Pit. So it was really funny because like I was reading the character he based on me, and I was like, Patrick, was I really like this? He goes, yeah, and you were. It's just it was really weird to see someone else's like
Oh yeah.
outside view, you know what I mean? And just oh wow, yeah, I guess it was. I just don't think of it that way. But anyways, I wandered off the point.
But it's weird because well, all fiction is kind of a form of memoir. It's just creative
Yeah, yeah, just
memoir in a sense.
you know.
But you need to write something else for the magazine.
Yeah, I guess I should. I'll have to think of something I'd really want to write about. I have
Well,
to think about that one.
obviously, and you should do something about the noir horror crossover.
Yeah,
We've touched on that a little bit,
yeah,
like when Steve Cronenberg did his article about Laird Cregar, it was
yeah,
that could go either way. I mean,
yeah.
he did both. But just looking at I'd be curious to anyway, we don't need to talk about this right now.
Right.
But I'd be curious because as I have said before on this show, um, horror is to our contemporary culture what film noir was to American culture back then. Right? I mean, whereas everybody says, oh, noir was reflecting these things under the surface of, blah, 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 of America at mid 20th century, I think noir has supplanted that as commentary on the culture that we live in now. Like it's the genre that is most reflective, creatively reflective of the horrors of contemporary culture, right?
I mean, I think that's always been true with horror, though. But I think now I think the audience for horror has gotten wider because it is right now horror's, I think, more accessible because of the A24 in films, and somewhat Neon, but really A24 in their films, um, which have definitely brought it more up into text. But horror has always reflected that, at least in a subtext, like
Of course, but what's to
yeah,
me what's very
yeah,
interesting about it is that it used to horror used to be kept from the kids,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and now it's for the kids,
yeah, yeah,
adults obviously as well, but it's just interesting to me that the two genres that continue to thrive, well, I wouldn't say thrive, that have survived theatrically are superheroes and horror,
yeah,
right? Which are basically aimed at kids,
yeah,
or at younger viewers, because they'll leave the house and they'll go out and pay money to go out and do stuff with their friends. That's
yeah.
the way the business operates. But I think there's something more to it than just the practical economics of it. I think it's saying something on a deeper level as well.
Yeah, and that's the kind of
But
interesting thing about horror too. I mean, because those are two genres are still working, like you said, right? It's super, and they're very different. Like superhero films are very, very different animal than horror films. And I think like there's a lot of questioning of things in horror films, like ultimately, like questioning the status quo and stuff like that. I mean, especially I think especially women and women's roles like that in society are always being really questioned in horror now in a really interesting way. I mean,
mm-hmm.
which sometimes, like I said, more sort of openly and sometimes less so. But yeah, there's been a lot of, and just horror films are just like, they're just really creative now in a way. I mean, extremely creative because I know I keep saying this, but it's because they're fairly low budgeted and they're going to make money. So there's a lot more. I think the people writing and directing these things have a lot more freedom than any other genre of films being made right now.
And do you distinguish between, like, because sometimes I just get grossed out. I have to be honest. Like this series of films, The Terrifier.
Oh, I'll never watch those. I don't do that. I do not do Carnage Candy. That is not my
Oh, is
freaking.
that what it's called? Carnage Candy?
Yeah, that's what some people call it, where it's really about the special effects and stuff like that. I don't like stuff like that
No,
at
see, that
all.
just turns
I
me
I don't
off. And it's like, I
yeah,
can't
I don't
believe
like
that,
it.
like they let kids go and watch this stuff. And it's like, that's the thing, there is no way you can keep this stuff from kids anymore. It's
Yeah.
an impossibility. There is no parental guidance or anything. It's all gone, all of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's really funny because one of the things I've seen people talk about that go to the horror conventions, I mean the people that are there as guests, like, um like Kane Hodder, who played Jason several times, and Betsy Palmer was kind of an interesting one too. Is they talk about now people are bringing their kids to the festivals because these people were watching the movies back in the 80s and they introduced their kids to horror films and they come to the festivals together, so it's a big, like, they see these different generations of families, and Kane Hodder talks about, like, taking photos with babies and stuff
yeah,
because
yeah.
the horror people can be very, very fanatical. And it's kind of interesting too, like with Betsy Palmer, because she did Friday the 13th literally because her car broke down. She had a specific car she wanted, and she got the script for Friday the 13th. And this is the thing she became the most famous for, by far. And friggin' Ebert published her address in his review, telling people they should write her because it was so despicable that she was in this movie, because he hated Friday the 13th so much and thought it was like so
Wow.
terrible. I know, isn't that amazing? Anyway, so
That's
she was
that's
not
crazy.
really like proud of it, but one of the things that kind of happened is she started going to the conventions and she saw like people loved her so much. The fans would come up and were really excited, and she really liked these kids that were the fans of the film, and it made her really change her mind about how she felt about being in Friday the 13th. Because
Yeah.
people really, yeah, anyway, it's all very interesting. Yeah, I know. Yeah, if you go back and look at the old Siskel and Ebert reviews about horror films, it's very interesting. I think they're right about some of them, but they're really wrong about a lot of them too. It's very interesting to go back and see, because Ebert was a huge proponent of Halloween. That's part of the reason why
Right.
they picked up
Right.
word about. He
Well,
the guy that wrote about.
this is a big dilemma because it's always
Yeah,
interesting to me how, a genre is a genre,
yeah,
fine. And some people, if you look at old New York Times reviews, they just would never give a good review to a genre picture at all. Like it's like, why bother? I mean,
yeah,
they have no value. But it's so weird because like in horror films, there are clearly clever, really well done, smart movies.
yeah.
And then there's stuff that's just the lowest trash I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, they're exploitation films too. And like I said, I just don't like, I mean, and that's why it's so funny because like I really like Dario Argento in a lot of ways as a filmmaker, but I still like close my eyes during, I mean,
Yeah.
his films are gorier than I really like, but he's such a good filmmaker that I get compelled into watching them, and obviously the soundtracks. But I really have like a limit. Like I don't like the French extremism. Like they can go
Oh, you almost did it. You
I
almost
almost did
broke
it.
the
Our
cleanliness
agreement
of this episode was almost broken.
was
What
almost
do you read?
broken.
Now,
Yeah.
what's an example? Is that like a film like High Tension? Is that
Yeah.
is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. And those films, like I haven't even like I don't even want to watch them because I just don't really like gore, and I really don't like over the top gore. Like I really have a limit. And
Yeah.
there's
Well,
things like,
the point
yeah.
I'm fumbling making here is that at a certain point when so much of this stuff gets made, it becomes pointless to split hairs and say, well, this one is really well done and this one is trash. Like the
Yeah.
difference between Halloween and Friday the 13th, or the
Yeah.
difference between, I don't know, like something like I'll just say High Tension and something like The Terrifier or something. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just using that as an
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it's like once there's just this overwhelming amount of it, what the hell difference does it make to divide between? But this one is well done and that one's not. It's like the point is that's now acceptable entertainment for a 12-year-old is to
Yeah.
go see
Yeah.
The Terrifier, and it's like,
Which I
how
think is
the hell did
insane.
that happen?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I still remember a time when I saw Blue Velvet. I seen it once in the theater, and then they were showing it on campus when I was at college and university in Boulder. And some woman brought her like 8-year-old daughter with her. And it was like, are you just trying to make sure she never has sex? Is this like some sort of preemptive birth control thing? Because why? Because even if she couldn't understand it, it's still highly emotional and
Well,
disturbing. You know what I'm
because
saying?
you're putting images and ideas in a kid's head that they are
Yeah.
unable to process.
Yeah.
That they and like that's, you know again, who's to say?
Yeah.
Clearly, David Lynch had that image of Dorothy Valens put in his head in real life when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Because he and his brother saw this woman, bloody naked woman, walking down the street in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it obviously affected him, that it became the basis for a movie he made later in his life, right? So
Yeah.
you can't say it was a bad thing for David Lynch to be exposed to something like that. But to actually, it was happenstance with
Yeah.
him to take a kid to a movie like that and to put him in,
Yeah. And it's really
inject
weird.
those images in their head is like, holy.
And action films also became extremely violent. Like people don't talk about that, but starting in the 80s, like action films got really quite violent, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, well, and come on,
Yeah.
have you ever even looked at like Mortal Kombat,
Yeah.
like the
I
game
saw,
Mortal Kombat?
yeah.
It's like this is something that kids play.
Yeah.
Like you've got to be kidding me. Anyway, I
No,
don't
you're
want
not
to
into that.
go into this, but it does. It is like you realize there's no coming back from this when the culture reaches a certain saturation point. There's no going back. Because if it makes money, they're going to make more of them, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, anyway,
Yeah.
weird note to end on. I was trying
Yeah.
to convince you to write a story for the Noir City magazine about horror noir,
I
and,
will.
and then somehow it turned into this cultural cesspool thing of the whatever.
I don't know. I'll have to think about it if there's something that I feel is a good example of that I would want to write about.
I do think that there's a lot of great storytelling and creative filmmaking in the horror genre,
Yeah.
and I only watch horror movies by myself.
Yeah, because
I would never subject Kathleen to, she wouldn't sit still for it. So if she
yeah,
goes on like a 4-day business trip or something, I'll say, well, when I'm looking for something to watch, I'll include horror
yeah,
because I'm never going to watch it at any other time because I won't even have it on in the house when she's at home because
yeah.
it freaks her out.
Yeah, I usually go by myself to the theater, or I watch a lot by myself. But then Ted is game every once in a while. So usually, if I can find something that I think he'll think is interesting, we'll watch it. If it's something I think like Heretic and stuff like that, I showed him because I thought those were really films that had a lot of interesting ideas in
Is that
them.
the one with Hugh Grant?
Yeah,
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. I heard
it's a
that's
great
pretty good.
film.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a great film. Yeah.
I'm going to watch that at some point. But
So
that's
horror
not one
film
that
that
Kathleen can't watch that, right?
no, not with
Okay.
that ending. No.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
It's not gory, but the ending is very intense, and I don't think she'd like that part.
Okay. Well, she has no qualms about when she's had enough. She just gets up and walks away. So she would just walk away,
Yeah,
even if she's watched the film for like 80 minutes. If she knows it's going to be bad, she'll just get up and walk away.
yeah.
Which is what I'm going to do right now.
Okay, yeah.
So,
I've got to finish up. I've been editing our last episode of Esketti, and I'm getting that all together. And then I have the Columbo group. For people that don't know, me and Doug Greaves started a group of people who watch. We've been watching every episode of Columbo. So if you're interested in that, you can just look at Just One More Thing, the Columbo Experience group on Facebook. But I have to get my work done so that I can enjoy that tonight.
okay, very good.
Yeah,
You got a big night ahead of you. Okay.
yeah.
I am signing off, and I'm glad we got another one in the under our belt here. And I'll see you at the TCM
I'll
festival.
see you at TCM.
Fantastic.
Okay. Say
Okay.
hi if you see me, guys. Okay, bye.
Bye.